Let's move on to the mailbag. If you have questions, you can email them to me, thesolomonster@gmail.com. Please include your name and where you are from, but at least your name. Some people still don't do that. You could also send MP3 questions as audio attachments if you would like to do so. This comes from Trevor. I was watching the second episode of the Monday Night War. Eric Bischoff said that Sting was supposed to be the third man in the NWO until Hulk Hogan called an audible. Do you think the business would have been as hot if Sting was the leader rather than Hogan? Well, I don't think... Let's just go back a little bit here. I don't know that it was Hogan calling an audible. The story as it was always told was Hogan was not sold on the idea at first. I think Bischoff came to him, and Hogan was still very reluctant because Hogan had been the red and yellow for so long. He had been the babyface hero in WWE. Even at the end there, when people were kind of starting to turn on him a little bit, he left shortly thereafter, but they never turned him heel. He came to WCW. They gave him a ticker tape parade. He was the big babyface guy, and he brought in all of his friends, all of the big guys, helped get them jobs so he can beat them. Guys like Earthquake and Brutus Beefcake and Kamala, all these big dudes that Hogan could come in and just beat them. And him and Savage certainly beat a lot of people. If you go back to 1995, that was a horrible year for wrestling. And not just in WCW, in WWE as well. So now we're bleeding into 96, and Hogan, I think, had been gone for a few months. Maybe he was filming a movie or a TV show or something. And I had always been of the impression that Bischoff really had to sell him on the idea. He was not all gung-ho about it at first because he was worried about, harming his image or his merchandise sales or whatever. And essentially, he had to be talked into it. And so, yes, in the end, he made the call. He agreed to do it. And would the business have been as hot if it was Sting? No. It would have changed everything. I think wrestling was bound to get hot to a point no matter what. But would it have had the same effect with Sting or anybody else really in that spot instead of Hogan? No, I don't think it would have worked. Or it wouldn't have worked for nearly as long as it did. It had to be Hogan. Hogan was the biggest star in wrestling. The biggest name, the most recognizable name, and a guy who had not been a villain since before he really hit it big with that Hulkamania thing in the mid-'80s. I mean, he was a heel early on in his career. He was a heel in the AWA. So it's not like he had never played the bad guy before, but from the moment Hulkamania took off and he won that first world championship and beat the Iron Sheik, he had been the all-American, bread-and-butter, babyface, white meat hero. And nothing else. And all those years later now, here we are, 12 years later, whatever it is, and now you're going to turn this guy into a villain, and he's going to start healing on the crowd and calling them, idiots, and it was a big deal. I was a loyal WWF fan at the time. I would only flip casually on Monday nights. I wasn't ordering WCW pay-per-views or anything. And I remember the very next day, I was a camp counselor at the time. And I remember going to work, and there were a few other friends of mine who worked there as well who were also wrestling fans, and they told me what happened with Hogan. Because, back then I couldn't just go to a website that night on the internet and find out. And I was like, whoa, really? And I had to watch the next show to find out. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the footage. I wanted to know what happened. So they got me interested because I had grown up, as a lot of people did, as a Hulk Hogan fan. There's a lot of people who are wrestling fans right now, whether you like the guy or not, who would not be fans if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan. That is the truth. And it was a big, big deal when he turned heel. Having Sting do the same thing, Sting is not the same star that Hulk Hogan is. He wasn't then, and he isn't now. It would not have had the same effect. What effect then it would have had on the WWE, it's impossible to say. If it was Sting instead of Hogan, it wouldn't have stopped the ascent of Steve Austin. I think things probably would have happened just as they did. But maybe not. Because the Hogan heel turn happened in 96, and that's what really gave WCW the kick in the ass they needed to just start beating WWE week after week after week in the ratings. And it all goes back to Hogan linking up with Hall and Nash. If that doesn't happen, then maybe it doesn't create the level of competition that there was between the two companies, and maybe it doesn't light a fire under Vince McMahon's ass, and maybe Steve Austin doesn't get the kind of push he ended up getting. It's so impossible to say, but I can definitely tell you unequivocally it would not have had the same effect with Sting in that spot as it did with Hogan. Not even close.